Everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is a really exciting day, week for us here at the Council on Rural Development. Um, we have just launched the findings of our Youth Opportunity Initiative that we and others that you're going to hear from today have been involved in for the last year, going out around the state and collecting input from people of all ages. I will say it's exciting to see. It's been a bit of a scramble this morning because we've had so much interest from Vermont Public and WCAX and NBC5. There's so much interest in hearing what people have to say about youth opportunity and youth success in Vermont. So just really excited to see that and to see all of you on the screen here to have a discussion about this important topic. Just a quick kind of background for those of you that may be new to this space. This is the Vermont Council on Rural Development has a network called the Vermont Community Leadership Network. And every month, every few weeks, it's a bit intermittent, we hold gatherings just like this on topics that connect to rural communities. So the Council on Rural Development is a neutral facilitator of community and public process in Vermont. We facilitate community conversations when invited all around the state, but we also facilitate at the statewide level to bring people together with expertise. We're not experts in anything except for the facilitation side of the work. We bring together experts and leaders to help determine action for what we can do on behalf of rural communities in the state. And so this space is a way that, one of the most critical elements of a successful rural community, especially here in Vermont, are local leaders and folks that are getting things done in their community, in their regions, and across the state. And so these spaces serve as a way to convene people that are doing that work. So today is all about our work in the Youth Opportunity Initiative over the past year. I'll just give a quick background, and then I'm actually going to turn it over to my colleague Lauren to share the kind of overview of this report that we've released. And then I'm going to welcome our panelists in, who are both youth leaders and also folks in organizations that serve and support youth that were involved in our youth opportunity advisory group over the last year. And the idea is to have an open conversation with that group and then turn to all of you and hear your feedback and thoughts and questions as well. So quick background. Several years ago, coming out of the COVID pandemic, or I guess deeply during the kind of peak of the COVID pandemic, the Council on Rural Development Board was looking at, about 10 years before we'd held this statewide conversation, the Council on the Future of Vermont. And the board really decided it's time to have that conversation again, to go out to the state and say, what are the things we need to be focusing on now to be successful in the next 10 years? 20 years, 50 years. And so we built the Vermont Proposition. And the proposition outlines 10 elements that 4,000 Vermonters around the state pointed to that we should focus on today. That's the backdrop for this conversation. You can see the full proposition at futureofvermont.org. I'll have maybe Lauren, if you could plug that into the chat. So if you're interested to see that context and background, go explore that website. But we pulled together an action team of leaders across the state to say, what are the things we want to focus on this year? And last year in 2023, they heard from teachers, educators, youth, agency of education. They kind of interviewed folks and got the sense that this would be a good moment to have a deeper conversation around youth opportunity in Vermont, and not just the education system, but our value as a convener is to bring in the community voices, business voices, education voices, youth voices, and say, what do you think? What's working well? What are the bright spots and success stories? What are the current challenges that face youth and youth opportunity in Vermont? And then most importantly, what are your ideas for action? So that's what we did. Over the last year, we went all over the state. Lauren will share a little bit more about those details. And we held Youth adult co-facilitated conversations, thanks to Up for Learning for their help in pulling that together. Youth conversations, we had a survey, we had stakeholder interviews. We really tried to collect a variety of voices. And this report that we launched last week is the culmination of those conversations. It's the findings that we heard. We had a youth opportunity advisory group that helped to guide that process and then helped to determine what those recommendations should be. So that's really what we're here to focus on. I think what I'll do right now, and I do want to say, by the way, thanks for folks putting your introductions in the chat. It's great to see who's here. And we certainly want to hear more from you all following the panel discussion. I'm going to turn to Lauren, and we thought it would be helpful just to give you a quick backdrop for those of you that didn't have the time to read every word of the report since Friday when we sent it. Lauren's going to give you a quick overview of what you'll find in there, and then we'll start our panel discussion. Ready to go, Lauren?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and walk you through a slideshow that talks about the different threads and themes that we sort of uncovered and heard from all the folks who participated. So, as Jenna was saying, the Youth Opportunity Initiative is a project of the Vermont Proposition and the Future of Vermont Action Team. And yeah, I'll glaze over this, but just say that the advisory group was really key in helping us shape the framework that we're going to talk through today. And many of our advisory group members are here. So we hope that they will, speak up and put resources in the chat and all of that good stuff. So to get a little deeper into who all participated in the Youth Opportunity Initiative public engagement process, we had over 600 folks through 12 forums, 4 interviews, and many, many surveys distributed by wonderful outreach partners all across the state. And the demographics of the folks who did respond are roughly similar to the demographics of the state at large. And so we're seeing this as a fairly representative proportion of BIPOC and youth participation, which are the 2 main demographics that we tracked. So 7.7% of participants in the Youth Opportunity Initiative identified as BIPOC, which is close to the 6% of the state population who identifies that way. 82% of participants identify as white. 92% of Vermont state population identifies as white. And then we did have 10% who didn't specify their racial or ethnic identity. And then we were really happy to get 30% of participants being 25 years or younger. So 30% of our participants were youth. And that's very similar to the 28% of the state population who are youth. And then to say a little more about our advisory group makeup, we had 7 youth members ranging in ages from 11 to 18, and 16 adults who have experience in a wide variety of social advocacy roles. So we tried to bring in experts, not just from education or health, prevention and care, but also from outdoor industry fields or outdoor education, and many other sort of sectors into our advisory group. And then we made sure in our outreach that we were reaching lots and lots of different sectors across Vermont. So we can take a look quickly at this map of who participated across the state. I think this is really lovely to see. These purple and orange dots are marking where we held forums around the state. The orange dots are youth forums. Like in Bennington, we talked to the community-based learning program at the Mount Anthony High School. In Brattleboro, we talked to the Brattleboro Area Youth Council. yeah, many more. In Burlington, we talked to City Lake Semester. And then we also held a regional forum, which was open to the general public and was held in a community space. And we spaced the youth forums and the general public forums out so that people could access at least one or the other across the state. And then we can add some stakeholder interviews. We did a few of those with specific experts. And then we have this awesome response to our survey from truly every corner of the state. And so that was really exciting to see. And many, many responses to sift through and to pull out the relevant information. Navigate back to our slideshow.
As you navigate back, Lauren, I do just want
Yeah.
to do a little shout out. Thanks to Front Porch Forum for allowing us to plug the survey on every single forum across the state. Very much credit that for that broad geographic distribution. Back to you,
Yeah,
Lauren.
absolutely. Yeah. Um, so let's talk about the framework of interconnected threads that we heard through this process. So certain themes really kept coming up in every forum and every survey response. And we we did an initial effort, Jenna and I, to consolidate those and to try to pull out the major themes, but then we took it to our advisory group and we asked them, based on their expertise, working with youth across the state, what were they seeing, and how would they adjust what we had pulled together. And in the end, we ended up with these 6 threads. So I'm going to just read through them. We heard from everybody that we need to focus on a high quality, flexible, equitable, and safe education system. I'm sure that's no surprise. Youth spend a lot of time in school. It's a really important part of their day. And of course, Vermont values our education system. We also heard people really speaking to wanting to expose youth more and in more diverse ways to opportunities for work and life experience. We talked about many different ways that we need more vibrant, supportive, and resilient communities, whether that's infrastructure or community events and gathering, or just a feeling of belonging in community. We also heard a lot about youth needing dedicated spaces and activities that are accessible to them and that are specifically welcoming to them and their families. We heard over and over again a value across Vermont for outdoor connection and environmental health and well-being. And no surprise, we heard a lot about health, both physical and mental health, and well-being, and the need for access to more supports for those things. So we also noticed as we were pulling this together and researching the other folks who have been working on this in Vermont, we noticed a large overlap with the State Youth Council's recommendations to the legislature and the governor. And so we're very happy to have a couple of the Youth Council members here today, and we have started the process of collaborating with them as well. There were a few ideas, specific action ideas that really came up across all of these threads, and that seemed to impact really everything we talked about, and that the more we can do to change these things, the more we can do to support youth across the board. So those cross-cutting ideas were expanding the community schools model, addressing transportation, expanding the focus on mental health support, and increasing youth voice, both leadership and engagement throughout leadership and decision-making processes. So within the discussion of a high quality, flexible, equitable, and safe education system, a few action ideas rose to the top. Those include increasing access to mental health providers in school, funding statewide facility improvement, improving prevention of hazing, harassment, and bullying, increasing racial equity education and training, attracting, supporting, and retaining skilled educators, supporting, funding, and elevating the community schools model, and requiring deliberate student and adult connections throughout school. In the opportunities for work and life experience, we heard these action ideas being really critical. Exposure to career opportunities and pathways starting in elementary school. We heard a lot from career centers and tech centers, and everybody was really enthusiastic about how positive those systems are within our education system, but also kept saying, like, it's so hard for youth to have to make a decision in their sophomore year to go to one of those programs when they haven't had any exposure beforehand. So we saw some examples where youth were getting exposure starting in elementary school and middle school, and those were highlighted as much more positive experiences and productive experiences for youth. We also talked about scaling up community-based learning opportunities, integrating community into the schools more, and training and connections programs to pair youth with, sorry, my image of you all is hiding the words that I need to see. So yeah, so training and connections programs to pair youth with employers. The idea there being that many employers haven't worked with youth before, or many youth have contradictory schedules to a job schedule, and just finding ways to connect them and make it more accessible for everybody to employ youth and have youth have positive employment experiences. We also talked about centering curriculum on critical work and life skills. That's the idea of identifying those transferable skills and making those the core of the curriculum, as opposed to having them be an afterthought. And we talked a lot about increasing local transportation options, and you're going to see that come up later as well. In vibrant, supportive, and resilient communities, we heard about increasing diverse youth voice in community and school leadership. So some suggestions were that that could look like trainings for municipal leaders and for youth on how to engage in municipal processes, for example. We also heard about funding, expanding and supporting the community schools model, as we've said, increasing mentorship programs for youth of all ages, building support and connection and training for parents and families. Under the idea of accessible and welcoming youth spaces and activities for youth and families, we talked a lot about maintaining stable sources of funding for youth spaces and activities, whether that's summer camps or after school programs, or just a teen center, something like that. Expanding resources and support for startup of third spaces. So how do we start up those third spaces, those community centers, et cetera? And improving transportation access, again, so that youth and community members can get to the places they need to go for those spaces and activities. In outdoor connection and environmental health, we talked about prioritizing place-based programming in schools and beyond, ensuring education on sustainability and environmental health, more and earlier exposure to outdoor professions, as well as a range of other professions, continuing and accelerating to address direct causes of climate change and other environmental issues. And then finally, under this idea of health and well-being and access to support, the key action ideas were expanding community hubs models for healthcare, social services, parental resources, and so forth. And potentially bringing those community hubs to the community where it's most needed, rather than having them, in a big city if that's far away. We also talked about building on the project aware model of coordination and collaboration across healthcare providers in different programs, from prevention to continuing care, for example. Addressing the shortage of mental health care providers, increasing regional transportation access and systems, and expanding the community schools model. So as we're going forward and as we, go through this discussion, we also want you to keep in mind that VCRD is going to be holding the Vermont Community Leadership Summit on August 6th in Randolph. And that summit will have a whole thread of workshops and panel discussions on youth opportunity in Vermont. And we are also going to be holding a convening of leaders in September to catalyze collaboration. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me with questions about the report. And I will turn it back to Jenna.
All right. Thank you, Lauren. Um, So, uh, that's just a quick overview of what we heard. As you can see, it's a lot. There's a lot in there, a lot of content. And I know at first glance, it can feel a little bit overwhelming. Like, gosh, there's so much to be done. Um, I really came out of the last year feeling a little bit of that, but also a lot of inspiration around things that we're already seeing. A lot of those action ideas we just shared, there's already things happening in a lot of those spaces. But there are a lot of challenges that remain too. So our idea with this panel that we're about to dive into is to kind of bring those findings to life a little bit and hear some reflections on what the needs are and what some of those success stories are and some thoughts on how we move forward. So I think what I'm going to do is to quickly, rather than introduce the panel, I think I'll have my panelists each introduce yourselves, and we're going to take about 40 minutes. There are 6 of you, and so we'll want to be fairly brief in our reflections, knowing that we're going to have some time for discussion afterwards and questions. So I'm just going to kind of go down my list and just have you each introduce yourself, your name, any affiliation you want to mention, and the role that you play, and then we'll dive into some questions. So I'll just call in each of you, starting with Lindsey.
Thank you, Jenna. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lindsey Halman. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the executive director of Up for Learning, which is short for Unleashing the Power of Partnership for Learning. And I'm also a former public school educator of 15 years in Vermont and a parent of a 7th grader. And I'll pass it along to whoever's next.
Great, thanks, Lindsey. Let's go to Samantha next. Sam Stevens.
Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Stevens, she, her. I am the Community Schools Coordinator for the North Country Supervisory Union, and I'm also the parent of a rising 2nd grader at the awesome Charleston Elementary School.
Thank you. Harmony, you're next on my screen.
Hi, I'm Harmony Belle Devoe, and I'm she, her, and I'm Youth Poet Laureate of Vermont. So I try to open minds through language and give tools for youth to express themselves. And I'm chair of the Equity and Anti-Racism Committee on the Vermont State Youth Council. And my family owns a cultural event space and art gallery called Fire Folk Arts, and I'm the youth event co-producer there. I'm an equity intern at my school, so trying to get more representation in my district. We're working on getting a DEI coordinator for my school. And then I'm in multiple advocacy clubs at my school, at Harwood.
Oh, Harwood. Great. I was going to ask what school. Harwood Union. Thank you, Harmony. Kayla, you're next.
Hello, my name is Kayla. I use she, they pronouns, and I am a co-coordinator at the Education Justice Coalition of Vermont.
Excellent. Matt.
Hey everybody, I'm Matt Wolf, he, him pronouns, the Senior Associate for Youth Empowerment at Vermont Afterschool. I myself have 2 college students now, oh my goodness, and a graduating middle schooler, and focus on youth leadership and empowerment work in Vermont.
Excellent. And Josh.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Lauren. I'm Josh Stearns. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the chair of the Vermont State Youth Council. And I live in Norwich, Vermont, but I'm a graduating senior at Hanover High School in Hanover, New Hampshire.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you all for being a part of this conversation. I think I actually want to start. Well, maybe we'll first start just because we just heard that list of findings in this report. I'd love to hear a kind of brief reflection from each of you on when you think about the findings or what we heard around the state, what are the things that kind of resonate with your experience, whether as a young person yourself or as an advocate or educator? What really resonated with you, and what things you kind of, what themes stand out to you as really critical? And maybe Josh, since you just spoke last, maybe we start with you, and then if others just kind of wave at me if you're ready to dive in.
Sure. Well, I guess as a young person, all of the findings in the report resonated with me. I could see them all reflected in my experience as a young person and in what I see in my peers. And I also just want to say I'm really appreciative of everyone who's here and also everyone who made this report possible, because I think this is just really important work. One point that I wanted to focus, though, on in the report was mental health and access to support. I think over the past, especially since the pandemic, over the past few years, the youth mental health crisis has been only growing. I will say one good sign recently, I think, and as was noted in the report, was many organizations and agencies are now kind of coming to realize the importance of this crisis. I think a healthy Vermont in the future is one which empowers its young people and which allows for easy access to mental health care and healthcare for young people throughout Vermont. That could be through schools or through more dedicated funding for programs. And also, as Lauren noted, I think this aligns pretty closely with some youth council recommendations to the General Assembly and Governor about youth mental health support in Vermont. And it's been one of the youth council's major focuses. And I think we've seen it truly take on just major importance in schools throughout the state. And it's just a major issue that everyone needs to focus on.
Great. Well, thank you, Josh. And actually, Lauren, while we're talking, if you could actually share the State Youth Council recommendations in the chat, it might be nice for folks to see that as well if you haven't already. And yes, Josh, it's something we certainly heard over and over again, especially in our conversations with youth through this. And Lindsey, it looked like you were ready to chime in next.
Well, I would echo everything that Josh just shared. And yes, everything resonated and there are no surprises. And I think our work at Up for Learning, we work with youth and adults across the state on sharing power, voice, and responsibility for change in their communities and their school communities. And these are the critical pieces that keep coming up time and time again, especially around mental health. And I think what Josh lifted up is this discrepancy in access and opportunities throughout our state. And I am really appreciative that this report, is reflective of so many communities across our state, because I think in some areas we have resources and opportunities for youth, and there are other areas of our state where those are really lacking. And the cross-cutting threads and themes felt really important, and you can see that there's so much overlap in all these different threads. And there's what I also appreciated about the report is that it starts with strengths. There's so many bright spots in our communities, and but we need to start thinking about how do we make those connections so that there's access and opportunities for all young people in some of our communities that don't have access as and opportunities like other communities. And it made me think a lot about the fact that we have policy in place already that supports a high quality, flexible, equitable, and safe education system and opportunities for work and life experiences within and beyond the classroom. And so I think if we can amplify those policies and support our schools in putting those into practice, that would be another next step. I'll pass it to whoever to go next.
Lindsey, Sam?
I want to agree with both of them and say that I felt like one of the themes across everything was the role of community and the myth busting that youth did for us around the idea that youth do want to be involved with their communities. They want to be involved in decision making. They want to help create the Vermont that they want to live in now and in the future. And I think that that really goes against some of the rhetoric that's out in the larger community. I think that's why this report has gained so much traction in the early days, is because it is lifting up so much that is working and also saying the youth want to be in it with the rest of their community members. And so I'll also add, I am the community schools coordinator for North Country Supervisory Union, but we saw over and over the role that community schools can have in bringing up these themes and bringing forward the opportunities that youth want to see in our state. And I think part of the reason that it shows up again and again is that it's resolving some of those things that we think of it as intractable problems, like transportation, because it creates that local place, that place recreates, I think is probably the better way of saying it, because schools have so often in the past been that central location in towns and villages that is not just for children and youth to come together for education, but also for community members to come and be a part of each other's lives. And so I think bringing that back into our school community post-COVID is really essential, and the opportunity that comes with community schools. So I was not surprised, but really happy to see how often that was coming up as a solution to a lot of the issues presented.
Great, thank you. Matt, it looks like you were maybe ready to chime in.
Yeah, oh, sure. Yeah, I just want to support what everybody is saying, and actually to add to that, it's I really think, Lindsey and Samantha, what you two are talking about is really about a culture shift that I don't think that the John Q. Public necessarily values young people as much as I would like them to anyway. I mean, we have laws in place, we have systems in place. I believe a piece of well, it's busting those myths, right, Samantha, that folks don't think young people want to be involved, and they actually do. And it's why I completely agree with everything. And I love this report. Everything in there is things we've all seen and experienced. And I guess I just want to highlight, as far as my piece, that the around youth voice and leadership and engagement, I feel like that's where we really have an opportunity to affect some change in a lot of these things, because if we are involving youth voice and leadership, in the community schools things, or in our communities, or in creating spaces like youth spaces in our communities, we're increasing their agency, right? We're increasing their sense of belonging, connectedness to each other and to a larger community. That's going to help with some of these other issues in terms of like the youth mental health crisis and things. So I don't know. Anyway, I'm really excited about the opportunities, the youth leaders we have in the room here today, the ones we have all over the state, and how, as more and more of us as adults, and Lindsey called it, learn to share power with young people, we will turn the curve on this stuff.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Harmony next, and then Kayla. What resonated with you?
I agree with everyone. I feel like everything was really resonating with me, and it's like a lot of the things that I think about a lot. Some of the things that I really connected with were the high quality, flexible, equitable, safe education system, especially the funding for it, and the hiring skilled educators, and the lack of safety due to bullying. And I feel like I liked the action that went with it, the provide more opportunities for racial equity education and training. I feel like that's really important, just so that the staff and the students are both aware of what's going on and how to be respectful. And then I also liked the vibrant, supportive, and resilient communities part. I feel like which part was it? The community schools model, because I hadn't really heard about that, but it sounds really important. So I'm gonna look at that act that was in the link, because that seemed really important to incorporate in all the schools. And also the spaces and activities that are accessible and welcoming to youth and families. With Fire Folk Arts, I feel like we're not a nonprofit, so we can't get as many grants as nonprofit organizations can get, but we're still a third space that like a lot of families and youth like to go to, but we can't really get the funding that easily. So I feel like the stable source of funding dedicated to youth spaces really resonated with me.
Excellent. Thank you, Harmony. And where is Fire Folk Arts? I don't think you said where that's located.
It's in Waitsfield, Vermont.
Awesome. Thank you. Kayla, do you have reflections on what resonated with you?
Yeah, yeah, I agree that the whole report resonated with me and what I've heard from many of the youth that I've worked with. And the parts that stood out most to me were thinking about a safe education system, recognizing that school is very different now than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so I think a lot of adults have different perceptions of what school safety looks like than what a lot of youth are saying now. So I really want to emphasize like listening to youth and what they think safe schools look like. And a big piece of that is addressing hazing, harassment, and bullying.
Great. Thank you, Kayla. So I want to shift. I want to hear a little bit more. And you all have named a few things. But does anyone have more to share on any other pressing challenges? And I do, of course, I love focusing on the success stories and action, but I know for me, as someone who doesn't work with youth as often as I probably should doing community work, I learned so much about those challenges that youth are facing, and I just want to kind of open up that conversation. What are you seeing, Lindsey?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, we often hear, or as adults, we often say we want to hear what youth have to say. But then the question I would ask is like, do you really? Are we ready to hear what youth have to say? And do we have the mindset and mental models to understand that we can work together to create solutions and action? We often ask young people, you know, what are their concerns? What is challenging them? What do they want to see? And we take that, we gather it, and then I would say in the worst case scenario, it's very performative or tokenized. And in the best case scenario, maybe it's a consultancy, but we're not truly engaging in partnership. Having young people, you know, we want youth on our boards, but have we provided them with the skill set and the training they need to show up and feel like they are equal members of a board or a council or their community? And I think, you know, the most pressing challenges that we hear have already been lifted up, but really around mental health, engagement in school, and this relationship piece, the sense of belonging. And I believe that if we could start as adults with looking at our own mental models and what we believe about young people and what they bring to the table, what they bring to the work, we would be able to lift up some new and creative solutions and work together. I also just want to add that one of the most pressing challenges is we tend to often ask the same youth over and over to be on these councils or boards. And so are we really getting a representation of our youth in Vermont when we are asking them to take part in these opportunities? And or are we continuing to tap into the same youth over and over again? And so we're hearing the same voices. And so how do we create the scaffolding, the skills, the learning that needs to go with helping youth show up as equal partners with adults in community change, and not just checking the box that we have a young person on our board or a young person on this council or a young person at this meeting? As an adult, I think I would need the same skills to show up as at a select board meeting and understand how to navigate those. Our systems are quite complicated, so how do we support one another in fully showing up and being able to share our voices and share our ideas for creative solutions?
Lindsey, any other panelists have reflections? I am curious, actually, if we could focus on one part of it. Kayla and Harmony, you both brought up you'll notice one of the headlines is that safe, equitable education system. And the reason it ended up there is because it came up so often. And I will say, as the facilitator, seeing it come up in both very rural areas as well as in our more populated areas in Vermont, like Burlington and Barrie and Bennington, but in different ways. And I just love to dig into that challenge. I don't know, Kayla, if you want to start when you highlight that piece of the report. Could you share more about what you've been seeing in your work around safety in schools? And then Harmony and Josh, I'd love your reflections on that too.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of it is it's around creating an environment of belonging within a school, and students not feeling like they belong because they're experiencing bullying, or because an educator isn't using the right name or pronouns with them. I think a lot of it is around making sure that students feel that supported in their learning environment. And that comes from the adults in the space, but also their peers being able to support them. And I'd also just add that there are still many schools in Vermont that have police in their schools, and a lot of students do not feel safe with police in schools. And so thinking about how to address that as well, especially for youth of color, but also youth with disabilities and queer and trans youth.
Harmony or Josh, do you have any reflections on that topic and what you're seeing in schools?
Yeah, I feel like at my school and just like in my community in general, I live in a pretty rural area, but there's just a lot of closed-mindedness. Like, people just aren't open to things that are new. Like, if it's even just people who maybe identify similarly to them, but they're from a different place. Like, people are just closed-minded and don't really want to see anything that's different to them in their communities, which obviously ends up creating a lot of harm for the people that may be different from the people creating harm, like discriminatory behavior. But I feel like in my school, there's definitely a lot of racism. Like on the buses, there's a lot of like bullying and hazing like that. So definitely like a lot of closed-mindedness and just making fun of people for their identities and just saying there's a lot of microaggressions in my community. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Sam, you had and then we'll come back to Josh as well.
I just really agree with everything that has been said on this. And I think, you know, adults, both in school communities and in communities at large, need to take a stronger approach, stronger response, have a louder voice on dealing with harm happening both in schools and outside of schools. And there's a lot of pressure from society and the media that adults feel when they're trying to address harm in schools. But ultimately, the student voice is, I loved, I think Kayla said that we have to listen to what students say safety in schools looks like, because it isn't the same as it was in the last decade or 2 decades ago. So I think about the role of restorative justice in schools and how healing harm is a responsibility of the larger community, and that our schools are in community, and just all of the ways that thinking about bringing more community adults and students together is really, you know, the thing that can help impact all of the issues that we're seeing around creating belonging and safe spaces for learning. And I also think that that directly relates to an overarching concern that I have around the challenges, which is youth keeping hope, and whether that's around being harmed in school, or that's around managing the very real stress of housing crisis, mental health, physical health concerns, domestic violence and community violence that they are managing mentally and in their day-to-day lives, or whether that's around looking forward into the future of climate change and whether we're going to be able to come together to take an aggressive response that will manage that very real threat to all of us. I mean, these are the issues that I see threatening children's hope, youth's hope. And, you know, we've been running a program, a restorative truancy tutoring program through community schools over the last few months. And we had a kid tell one of our volunteers this week, you know, you old people have it all figured out. And the tutor was able to say, okay, yeah, I have been around longer than you have, but it's a myth. I do not have it all figured out. And they went on to have a conversation about what it means to face the uncertainty of, you know, what we're all trying to manage living together in these communities where we don't really know, you know, what the resolution of any of those large problems is going to be, but that by continuing to talk about it together, we're going to come together on our values and our shared solutions for those issues. And I think more spaces where those conversations are happening between youth and adults is really critical, because we have to make sure that youth know that, no, we don't have all the answers, and that we need to be in conversation or relationship to come up with the answers together. And to me, that's really the solution to dealing with healing harm in all of those realms and helping reduce the issues that are most impacting mental health for kids.
Thank you so much, Sam. Josh, you had your hand raised for a comment next.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add, well, I agree with all 3 points on this issue. But I guess I wanted to add that I think it's important to ensure that there's robust education in place to ensure that everyone understands the importance of diversity and accepting everyone. And I think one challenge, frankly, that Vermont faces is just perhaps teaching this and then not having it be reflected in the communities. And I think that can be really undermining of teaching about diversity. And I think, like as Kayla mentioned, and as Samantha mentioned also, there's just so much uncertainty in the minds of youth. So for example, having a police officer in your school, that can be something that can cause a lot of uncertainty for students. The student body of my school rejected like a service officer in our school in like 2018, so before I was there. But a lot of schools in Vermont still have officers there, like Kayla mentioned. And also I think, like in my school, there's a certain level of tension between students and the administration over phones, because I think a lot of students would feel unsafe without their phones if anything bad were to happen. And I think that's really just an unfortunate kind of symbol of where we are, and ensuring that school is a safe space for youth, because a lot of youth don't have that third space. So how can we make school kind of fill those two functions of being that third place for young people that they go to every day, in addition to their school?
Great. Thank you. Thank you all for those thoughtful reflections. And I want to move on to a next question. And Matt, I'm going to come to you first, since we didn't hear from you on that last one. And I think you probably have some good examples here. So we've been sharing some challenges, and there are more than what we just shared, of course. But I also learned so much about the bright spots and success stories. And we did in the report, if you get a chance to dive in, we highlighted, I think 3 or 4, maybe 4, Lauren, 4. We highlighted 4 success. Three highlights of just examples of really of wonderful bright spots. I saw Taylor Welch on this call somewhere. We highlighted the Bristol Hub Teen Center and a couple of others. And that was just like this, a small sample of all of the great stories we heard around youth leadership, youth spaces, addressing mental health, addressing some of these challenges. So I would love to hear from each panelist one example of a bright spot or success story that you've seen. Maybe it's something we should scale up or learn from, or just a fun story to share. And Matt, if it's okay, we'll start with you.
Sure. Oh, a fun story to I just think for me, and I want to add to what folks were saying earlier about the issues and how we can work to resolve them is really like Lindsey and Josh and Harmony and everyone was saying about coming together, right? As communities, like we all get a lot of individualism messages from our media, from our lives, from our work, from whatever. We really need to come together as communities, youth and adults, and really be willing to have those uncomfortable conversations and do that comfortably, you know, like leaning in. You really talk about bullying and racism, like that doesn't feel really good. Or to talk about, you know, suicide or home lives or things, like I think we really need to lean into those conversations, those uncomfortable conversations together. Because my experience of youth is they have no problem talking about that stuff. It's usually us adults that get a little uncomfortable. Anyway, but my highlight, my success story is about that idea of coming together, you know, as communities. And I think one of the highlights of my job and what we do at Vermont After School is in the Vermont Youth Project, where we give youth in communities the opportunity to spend money on improving their communities. And it's amazing the kind of things young people will come up with when you offer them, you know, $3,000, $5,000 to grant out to their community to create change. They think really, really beautifully about how to connect people, how to bring people together. And we're going to have some highlights at some point, even a video on it. We got a one-time opportunity because of Senator Sanders to increase that dollar amount to $40,000. We supported young people to wield $40,000 to support their communities in 5 areas in Vermont. And I can't wait to be able to highlight that. Anyway, I could go on for forever and I want to let other people have turns, but there you go.
Thank you. And it was really interesting, Matt. I think I shared this with you when we had youth conversations around the state. Youth that are involved in that work brought that up as a highlight and something exciting that's going on. I think one said Senator Sanders just gave us a bunch of money. I was like, that's great.
The interesting thing about that, Jenna, is we actually, the sad part is part of the struggle with that program is the young people in communities not believing us. Like they don't
Wow.
believe that we're going to spend $3,000, $5,000, $10,000. It was amazing how hard it was in some areas to convince these young people to dream because they didn't believe that the adults were actually going to follow through.
Wow. Wow. Interesting. Thank you. Other panelists, success stories, bright spots, highlights that you've seen. What's working well? Lindsey?
I think one that's top of mind for me right now, because it was just last week. We were at the State House, and Up for Learning partnered with the Secretary of State's office. They are conducting a civic health index across the state, which I think is really connected to this conversation. And one piece that they were very curious about is youth civic engagement. And they sent out a survey and had a very high response rate from Vermont schools, from youth in, I believe, grades 7 through 12 throughout the state. And again, it's like, okay, we did a survey, we asked young people what they believe about civic engagement, their own civic health. And what was promising is that they felt it was really important to have young people looking at their data, analyzing it, lifting up strengths and concerns, and then creating recommendations for a report that will be released in December after the elections for the whole state. And so a representative group of young people came to the State House from, I believe, 6 different middle and high schools across the state last Wednesday, and they looked at their own data and did some analysis and created recommendations, and that work will continue on with a number of youth. It just showed that there is a real interest in young people wanting to, one, look at their own data, analyze it, and then create solutions. So I was very excited about that project. And then based on a theme that's coming up here a lot, there is a number of dialogues that will be happening throughout the summer around school safety. And I just want to, again, lift up the point that Kayla said, is that, what we think of school safety as adults who went to, school 10, 20, 30 years ago is very different from what youth are experiencing today. And so Up for Learning is partnering with the Agency of Education and the Vermont School Safety Center on conducting dialogues throughout the state this summer around school safety. And so we're really hoping that, and those dialogues and that data will inform the governor's school safety conference in September. So I'm hoping that we can get a real pulse and a lot of young people showing up to share their insights on school safety and what that means to them. And it looks like Harmony.
Excellent. Yes, Harmony, go ahead with your success story or bright spot you want to share.
One success story is a lot of our events at Firefolk Arts, we get people from all around the state driving like hours to come to the events. And I feel like people are just really looking for a sense of community, which I guess could be kind of like a negative thing that people have to drive from so far. But I think it's also a positive thing that people are like willing to really search for it, to be able to connect to their community members and like expose themselves to art and like food from different cultures and things like that. So that was definitely a bright spot for me.
Great, thank you. Kayla, did you have a highlight that you wanted to share?
Sure. Yeah, I'll highlight the Unheard Stories project in Winooski. It's a student-led, adult-supported project that started out pretty small with students wanting to change stereotypes of Africans living in Vermont, and has now expanded to many different types of students sharing their stories in really creative ways through fashion, poetry, music, and they've done several performances. I think it's available on, one performance is available on YouTube, and I think it's just been a really powerful way for people to see, to hear what youth are experiencing, and really like change the biases that they have.
Great, thank you. Sam or Josh? Go ahead, Josh.
So I guess one example that I thought of when I saw this question was just in Brattleboro last year, as probably everyone's aware, Brattleboro extending voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds. And I think that this is just represents such a major step for the rights of young people in Vermont. Like, young people are the only group of people who can not be listened to, essentially. Everybody else has a right to a vote. And so I think it's just so important that when youth get this opportunity, people are aware of it. And I think just a few places doing this now could be the spark for more places to extend voting rights to young people. And I think, as people have been saying, it is completely a myth that youth don't want to be involved. Young people are are actively engaged, even though they don't have a vote in many communities throughout the state. And I guess another thing I wanted to highlight is just youth school board members throughout the state. And I think that we can definitely improve on this. I think that having young people who have voting privileges on school boards throughout Vermont is deeply necessary. And I think in the places where we see this, the communities are better for it. I think in these communities, there's more student engagement, more awareness of what's happening on the board level. And I truly think that the school boards and select boards are the places where the most deeply meaningful actions take place, which affect students' everyday lives. And it's just very important that we're making sure that students of today are going to be the democratic citizens of tomorrow.
Great, thank you so much. Sam, did you have a highlight you wanted to share?
I just want to bring attention to the fact that the after school and summer programs that are offered seem to be expanding in the state of Vermont, and they're doing it in ways that don't just resolve the needs of families for childcare, but provide really incredible programming for youth. And more of them, particularly in our supervisory union, are employing youth as well. So we see students who are leaving their flex block at the end of their high school day and going back into their school communities and participating as work site, workers in their school, in their home school. And I love the ways that encourages site coordinators to listen to youth around what programming can and should look like for kids in their community, but also in the ways that increases mentoring opportunities for youth. And we've just seen such enriching programming come out of that, as well as kids being able to work and be paid to do that work in their hometowns, which has really reduced issues around things like transportation that have made that hard for kids in the past. So that's exciting to me.
So thanks. So I do really soon want to shift to welcoming some questions and reflections and thoughts from participants on the call, but maybe I'll just one last question because it's come up a couple times, and maybe selfishly it's particularly interesting to us as facilitators of community process. I'm curious about, Josh mentioned participation on select boards and school boards. Matt, you mentioned, getting in, having these uncomfortable conversations and having youth adult discussions. And I'm curious if any of you in your experience have advice or tips on how communities can better engage and connect with youth. Where is it going well? Where could we be doing better? And just like a minute or so each, because we do want to shift to participants. Matt, do you want to start?
Yeah, I wanted to start. I actually, forgive me, folks, I have to run. I have to teach a workshop.
Right.
So I thought I would go and then kind of bow out. But if folks do have questions about the Vermont Youth Project or anything, Brianne is on this call, so she can answer questions. But my thought, oh, see, I got done, lost myself on what my answer was. I think it's that culture shift piece. I hope to impart to people the idea that our young people are experts in their experience and in their needs and in what the world looks like from their vantage point. And we really need to approach them for that expertise, not in a tokenizing way, as like Lindsey and other folks have referenced, not in a way just to make ourselves feel good, but in a genuine way where we want to hear their expertise and what they have to say, because we realize that it's critical to what we're doing. I'll say really, really quickly to the point about the whole back in my day piece. There is no my day anymore. My personal children are 14, 18, and 21, and 14 and 21 grew up in completely different worlds. 21 knows about life without smartphones and daily internet use, and 14 was 2 months old on somebody's hip with an iPhone in their hand. That's not even a third of a generation. So we need to set aside the idea that back in my day or what I did or whatever, and start coming together and having real honest conversations about what we need, and really uplifting our youth as the experts in their perspectives. And if we can do that genuinely, I honestly believe all these other pieces will fall together. Thanks, folks. I apologize that I have to leave early, but at least
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for fitting this in with a busy day. We appreciate it.
Take care.
Other panelists, ideas on how to better engage. Harmony, you want to share your thought?
Oh, I was just waving to Matt.
Oh,
but
I thought that was a raised hand. But do you have a thought you want to share?
Sure. I think like an important part of getting, kind of like what Josh said, just getting youth involved in their communities more. I feel like just providing more opportunities for youth to express themselves, both like with policy and on boards, but also like creatively in community spaces. I feel like it's just really important because I feel like youth definitely have like a lot to say and a lot to express themselves with, but adults often have the resources and are more able to uplift youth than the youth are able to do for themselves. So if the adults could like just provide space and opportunities and funds for youth to share their voices and experiences, I feel like that would be really important in this work.
Thank you. I love that thought. Not just about joining a school board, but do we have space to be expressive and creative and be ourselves in community? I love that. Lindsey.
Yeah, I'm building off of what Harmony shared. I think it's really important for adults to think about their own why. Why is it important for them to be working in partnership with youth or to have youth engage in whatever it might be, whether it's a select board, school board, community project. And by finding their own why, I think just highlighting what Harmony just said around like youth are experts in their own experience. They bring a lot to the table, and adults bring more time on earth. So perhaps the ability to bring some resources and some connections and ways to connect youth with other resources to the table. So looking at those as both as an both really important and powerful aspects to the work. And I think, the what, we often focus first on the what, like we have this thing we want to solve, we want to take care of it, but focusing on that why and helping people really understand the importance of having young people sitting side by side, sharing power, again, voice and responsibility for change. And then I would think, how do we do this in a meaningful and engaging way that it involves equitable access and opportunities for young people? So then we ask young people to come to a meeting at 7 p.m. That's not necessarily going to work for them. Or, something after school, and when there's a lack of transportation, or young people are responsible for their families or have a job. And so how do we shift the ways that we work as adults to work in partnership with young people? I think it's going to require some rethinking around how we do things in our community so that's not always on an adult's schedule.
Great, thanks. Sam or Kayla or Josh, any reflections on how to best actually meaningfully engage youth in community? Josh?
Yeah, I also wanted to kind of build on what Lindsey and Harmony were saying. Like I mentioned last, the importance of youth being on those decision-making bodies and having the vote. But I also really think that it's important for schools to be a safe space, as they were saying, and for youth to feel comfortable in their schools, to have an adult advocate. Every student should have an advocate for them in their schools. And really, schools should be, I think, an easy place for all youth to get involved, make connections, connect with their community. And I think that's true in some places throughout the state, but then also there are a lot of places in the state which I think there needs to be more, I guess, a more equitable distribution of resources to truly achieve that. And to truly meet students where they're at, and understanding that every student has different needs. And I think one point that was in the report, which I found really interesting, was that, yes, we're having a declining population of students in Vermont, but it's getting more expensive to educate students. It's getting more difficult to attract and retain skilled professionals and educators. And so I think, and even to maintain the facilities and infrastructure for schools throughout the state. And so I think we just really need to focus on ensuring and creating that space for our students, and ensure that that happens everywhere in the state. Not just looking at our own communities, but looking everywhere, and building a network throughout the state that will work to support each other and other schools and districts and all students.
Great, thanks, Josh. Well, maybe just a minute or two. Kayla or Sam, any other last words on that before we move to discussion? Yeah, Sam?
I agree with Josh. And I think the only way that schools are going to do all of the things that we need them to do for our youth is to bring in more community. We need more adults involved for all of these things to come to fruition. And I think sometimes that's about very practical problems and thinking ahead about logistics and how do we make sure that participating in schools as a volunteer is not going to be a financial burden on the volunteer? How do we make sure that there are monies available for those background checks? How do we make sure that we are putting out opportunities where anyone could see themselves being a part of that school community? And those are also the only people who are going to be able to carry that work on outside of the school community. The number one goal that I have in community programs that we build through community schools is that we have a good time together while we're together in those programs, so that when you leave that program and you see someone in the grocery store or on the street, you have that glimmer of recognition and the relationship that you can carry forward into the community. And so I love what Josh said, and I really feel that finding ways to reduce those teeny tiny barriers are the things that are going to make it possible for everyone to be involved.
Great. Kayla?
Yeah, I'll just quickly talk about the power of like third spaces and providing opportunities for youth to connect across the state. I've seen just really powerful conversations between youth who live in very different areas of Vermont and still have similar experiences, but also very different ones, and allowing them to just build connections and build power as youth in the same state.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you all for those reflections. I do want to shift. We've got a little bit of time. If anyone on the call has questions or even thoughts or reflections that you want to share based on what we've discussed, I would just ask, you can either put something in the chat, you can raise a hand, or you can wave at me if your camera's on, and we'll make sure to call on you. And we do have just about 15 minutes, so I want to be as brief as we can in these reflections, but get as many voices in as we can. Matthew, you have something you want to share or ask?
Yes, my question is, and I'm going to do this very, very quickly. I actually am, a member of Vermont's 15 committees statewide, and some of them are new. My biggest question is, to you guys, what does the definition of equity mean to you in your work and your organization? And how can that bring positive outcomes to the communities you serve? Again, the question is, what does the definition of equity mean to you in your role and your organizations throughout the communities for positive outcomes? Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. Do any of our panelists want to tackle that in your work? How have you defined equity? What does that mean? And I would say, especially relating to this work around supporting youth and equity in schools or youth spaces. Any reflections on that?
A lot of my work has to do with education. So to me, like, educational equity means everyone receives the opportunities and resources they need to reach their highest possible academic and social potential. And obviously this looks different for all students because everyone was born with different circumstances, identities, abilities. It also means creating opportunities for everyone to learn about injustices in the past, present, and future, in my opinion, and to develop the knowledge and skills to address the injustices. And I say this a lot, it's my little spiel. I feel like students need to be taught about the past so that history doesn't repeat itself, and then taught about current events so they're aware of what's going on. And then they should also be taught about how to be respectful, open-minded, and understanding citizens to create a better future. So just equity just in general, I feel like just means everyone gets what they need to reach their goals, and no one is discriminated against in reaching what they're trying to achieve, and just everyone feels understood and valid as the human in the identity that they have.
Amazing. Thank you, Harmony. Probably better said than many of us on this call could have done. I really appreciate your response. Any of the other panelists have a response to that? Lindsay?
Yeah, I would just put an exclamation point on what Harmony just said. I don't think enough said there. I would just say from our organizational, we believe that educational equity is a basic human right, and that, you know, in order to pursue that, we need to ensure that young people have the, you know, that right to a meaningful and engaging education. And that requires this concept of sharing power, voice, and responsibility, and ensuring that the people at the table, or if it's not the table, it's wherever you are, it is representative of the community, right? And so we need to continue to ask who's missing, which voices are missing, and how do we ensure that we can connect with them and build relationships.
Excellent, thank you. So we do have a few things in the chat. Mark Hughes mentioning don't overlook the Richard Kemp Center as a resource. Thank you for that. I will say, you know, as we, Lauren mentioned our kind of next steps here, as we look to the fall to convene organizations that are working in this space, we're going to be building a list of folks that are active in this space that should be talking in these different areas. And when we think about the youth spaces and, you know, third spaces, youth activities, we'll make sure to have the Richard Kemp Center on the list. And that to say too, if there are others like that you haven't seen noted in this report, or that you just want to be a part of this conversation, please reach out to us, because we're all still kind of, oh, thank you, Christine. We want to bring in as many voices as we can. So there was a question actually higher up in the chat about community schools. And I do just want to say, as I have heard from reporters and folks like reaching out about this report, that's the most common question I've gotten is, what do you mean by community schools? What actually is that, and what's going on? And I know, I don't know, Sam, if you want to share this, I know there's others on the call who are community schools experts as well, but Sam, if you want to do just like that quick overview of like what is a community schools and what's happening in Vermont with community schools right now, I think that would be helpful.
Sure. So in Vermont, we have a model of community schools that involves 5 pillars. And I think one of the most important things about the pilot that we are using in the state of Vermont to help uplift those pillars is that it's a way of thinking about all of the things that we know that students need in order to come to school ready to focus on their learning and to become active, engaged, and well adults in the state of Vermont. But it's a way of acknowledging that responsibility and that desire from the community to have schools hold that role and do it in an organized and thoughtful way. And so because every school community in Vermont is a little bit different, as we've heard here, we see themes across communities, but we also know that there are very unique characteristics across our communities regarding needs and assets. We can say in this community, a true need is around providing integrated student support. So things around basic needs provisions to our school community, because we lack widespread resources to resolve those in a different way. Or in another school community, they could say, we have a need to develop expanded and enriched learning opportunities, which might be an after school and summer program to help meet the needs of students in that area. So the pillars, I believe that there's a link in the chat from one of our UVM or AOE support people who can help provide a better overview of what that model is, but it's a way of thinking about schools as holistic models of supports for students and their families.
Excellent, thank you. And yes, if you scroll up in the chat, there are some links that folks shared with more information about that. There's another topic in the chat, but maybe I'm going to quickly come back to the group. Does anyone have a question or a comment that you want to raise here before we go back to the chat? Feel free to wave or unmute or raise a hand. Trish. Hi, Trish. Go ahead.
Oops. I love the idea of third spaces. I've actually started a couple. And that reminds me that I regularly use third things, otherwise known as poems, with prompts to start listening practices. And I think listening is far underrated as an essential part of communication.
Yeah, thank you, Trish. Karen, yes, you had a hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks. This has been so great. I mean, a lot of our work with the Regeneration Corps is like focused on connecting youth to local climate solutions. So we're mostly focused in the Upper Valley, and we have a large network of resources and kind of what we've identified as leaders in local climate solutions, you know, everywhere from regenerative ag to some solar. And we're kind of building that out and building this catalog of network. And I just want to say thank you to all so much. And also I would love to see this group convene again and get a chance to kind of dive into some of the wheels that might be turning around, you know, supporting the community schools connections and identifying pathways to lift up those community individuals that would love to support schools and aren't quite sure how to approach schools. And we've ended up providing kind of that liaisonship, if you will, not realizing that that's what we were going to be doing, but recognizing the need for it, and then building towards mentorships and community service learning projects, because a lot of schools require community service hours. So using that as an opportunity to elevate youth voices and connections in the community. So I love thinking about this. We are in deep strategic planning mode, thinking of like how we can do what we do better and shift to meet the landscape as well. So it's really nice to be here in this space and to meet you all. And I really look forward to August 6th. And thanks for the convening and the organizing work.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Karen. And really exciting to hear about the work you're doing. We will certainly be in touch to connect around that. Another question in the chat about transportation. Yeah, thanks, Lydia. Gosh, it just came up so much in every conversation that we had. Any of our panelists, do you have any specific comments or thoughts on what some of those needs are? For improved transportation for youth? Does anyone have reflections or things that you've heard or ideas you've heard? I know it's a tough one. Lindsey?
I've always been, when I was in the classroom, I always said that our schools need a fleet of vans. And because in order to get young people out into the community and to have experiences with community partners and to connect them to work opportunities and career opportunities, we need to be able to get them there, right? And so I just think it, thinking about how, you know, we can, that again, back to community schools, right? So, you know, if we can ensure that there's transportation at the schools for young people to get out into the community and for the community to get into the school to make that, you know, that web connected, I think that is one opportunity. And I don't have any other creative solutions for transportation. I just know it is really a barrier for a lot of our young people in so many areas of our state.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsey. Yeah, we heard from, just because we don't have them in the call, I'll just mention in Rutland, when we had our regional conversation there, the youth co-facilitator had also been leading youth conversations throughout Rutland. They're working on a youth center or a teen center in Rutland, but one of their priorities is actually really focused around transportation. And you know, that the Rutland region does have the benefit of a public, well, limited, it is a public transit system, and they've been working with that with the public transit group to think about ways to better serve youth, including like youth specific routes that they might take at certain times of the day. So just to say, like, well, it came up mostly as a challenge in the conversations. There were some really creative ideas and thinking, including a kind of shared ride service in the central Vermont area that's thinking about these things. So there's more in the report on that, but that's something I think as we think about this convening in September, could we bring in some ways to connect transportation folks that are thinking about this with folks that are leading in youth spaces to start to have that conversation? And any ideas around that we would certainly welcome. We have just a few minutes, maybe one last question or reflection, if anyone has one. All right, and I would also welcome just our panelists. Do anyone have last words you want to share before we close? All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap up here. So a couple last things I want to share. I'll take these last few minutes. So one, I am going to just go ahead and put a link to the website where we have this report. So that is in the chat right now. Oh, no, it's not. Everyone in meeting. Here we go. There we go. So in the chat now, that's the link to the report. Please take a look, spend some time in it, especially the highlights that we shared in there, but dive into those recommendations. If you have ideas, questions, thoughts, want to be included in next steps, please reach out to us. We're still learning in this space about who's out there and who could be involved. And we're just really looking forward to, so August 6th is the next opportunity we'll have to spend a little more time in this. Our annual Vermont Community Leadership Summit is August 6th at the Vermont State University Randolph campus. And that's a date actually that focuses on many different topics around community building and community leadership, but there will be a track of workshops that we'll highlight that are focused on youth leadership and engagement. Lindsey mentioned the Civic Health Index, the work she's been doing. She's going to be leading a workshop to share some of the findings there with other youth leaders. We will have a session from the Rural Youth Catalyst, a national organization, sharing a workshop on some similar findings at the national level. Thank you, Lindsey. Youth will be leading that workshop at the summit. And we'll actually have a whole session on that community schools model to share what's going on in Vermont and some strategies there. So please join us for that. And then again, we'll be convening again in the fall to take the action ideas in this report. We really hope to, Josh and Harmony, we hope to partner with the State Youth Council on that event, but to bring youth and adult voices together and start to learn what's already happening and hopefully put some of these ideas into action. So follow along. You all consider yourselves all on the email list now. You'll continue to get updates and just really appreciate you all taking the time. And to our panelists, to Kayla, Sam, Josh, Harmony, Lindsey, and Matt, just deeply appreciate your time on this initiative, your leadership on these topics, and your time today. So thank you, everyone, and we'll be in touch with next steps soon. Have a great rest of your week.